Grayson Grundhoefer, Sic'Em365.com, joins us now. We spent the majority of the whole first hour until now talking about NAL, so hopefully that itch has gotten scratched a little bit. Grayson joins us now, and Grayson, you had the column up on the site today about what to watch on the recruiting trail. What are some things that now that we're in the first week of May or first full week in May that you are looking for?
Yeah, so it's about to be a really kind of exciting time on the recruiting trail just because June is coming up and Baylor has 3 camps in June and then, of course, 1 at the end of July. June is also going to be a busy time because of official visits. Baylor's going to be scheduling those out. And it's really interesting because in the past, Baylor's really done, 1 big weekend, maybe 2 big weekends in the summer, and then kind of random official visits near the signing day. Obviously, if you find guys during the season, you don't want to have an official visit until right before the signing day. So usually it's like, 2 big ones and then kind of a couple sporadic ones late in the process. But it's interesting because this year, I've heard guys, they have a date the 2nd week of June and then the 3rd week of June and then the 4th week of June. So I'm very curious how that's going to work out, but it looks like things are going to be more spread out than it has been in the past. But some big weekends coming up for Baylor. I think that's really going to kind of get the momentum back going for the recruiting class, which currently sits at 9 total recruits, or commits, that is. And so I think we'll start to see a little more momentum as June comes and the summer goes through.
Grayson, you mentioned in your article that defensive back's a big priority for this staff.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of those positions where, they have 2 commits, right, at safety when you're talking about Javion Wilcox and Corey Huff. But they lost the safety commit a little bit earlier in the process in Tyler Turner. So I'm not going to say that they've been trying to make up that position because originally I think the goal was just, we'll take 2 safeties and then focus on cornerback. But I think if the right safety pops up, especially one that could play the field safety position, which JT Woods played last year. Devin Lemire started at that position in the spring game. But I think that's a position that they need to address in this recruiting cycle. They just need a little bit more speed on the back end to make it really work the way they did with JT Woods. So I think they're going to look at that position, try to find a best available type. But then as far as cornerback goes, they don't have a commit yet. And I think based on kind of everything I've seen and kind of just the way they've been recruiting the position, it seems like they definitely want 2. They might take 3 cornerbacks in this class, but it really is dependent on which guys commit and things like that. They're off to good starts with, guys like Jalen Braxton, who's making his commitment decision on July 9th. They're in a good spot with Chance Rucker out of Denton Ryan. He's another guy who will be taking his official visit in June. And then Maid Creek cornerback Tayshawn Wilson, we've talked about him a lot. He's been a big priority for this class, and he's got his official visit later in June as well. So those 3 guys seem to be, 3 of the main targets. And then there's a few other guys that will probably take official visits as June comes around. But, yeah, I'm looking at 2 to 3 at cornerback and then maybe 1 more safety added to this class.
Grayson, when it comes to, we were just talking about NIL for basically an hour. When it comes to that, do you feel like that's affected their recruiting opportunities or perhaps even recruiting wins to a major extent, minor extent? How would you say how NIL has impacted what their class would look like potentially otherwise, or what interest would look like otherwise?
Yeah, I think it has impacted it some in a maybe not necessarily a good way, but in an okay way, and then some in a negative way. Some guys are really, they're all about the NIL, and Baylor is just not really a school that is all about it. You know what I mean? Like, there's many other schools that are willing to find big NIL deals, and Baylor's just, that's not what Baylor's going to be about. They need guys who really want to be at Baylor, love the school, want to be there. And Baylor's going to do everything they can for their student athletes to make sure that, NIL is helpful, but it's not going to be over the top like we're seeing at, other schools like Texas, for instance. It's just not going to be like that here. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely narrows the pool a little bit of prospects that you can land some. But I will say, I think, for the most part, guys, there's like there's an ESPN 300, right? And I mean, all of those guys are not going to get offered big NIL deals. Like, there's going to be a lot of really, really good prospects in that 300 and outside that 300 that are awesome prospects who just don't get NIL deals. So it really hasn't impacted Baylor a ton, but I will say, it does narrow their reach a little bit, which makes total sense. And for the most part, they were going to land those type of guys anyways, regardless of NIL.
Well, look, the big money is still going to be reserved for the 5-star guys who have the most sway anyway and always did. So that's not going to change. So schools like Baylor, don't they, Grayson, just have to make sure that they're equipped on the mid-level, don't they?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like you said, Baylor hasn't ever been a school that's about chasing 5-star guys. Like, that just really hasn't been their motto. They've landed a couple really high-end prospects in the past, but it's not really something that they're targeting extremely heavily. And so those guys are going to get NIL deals. Cool. Baylor doesn't have to worry about those guys anyway. So, yeah, you're exactly right. Just be sure that you're taking care of your own student athletes, and then also worrying about, some of those mid-level battles where maybe you can find an NIL deal that's, something really positive for a recruit. Yeah, definitely.
How much do you think the success from last weekend's NFL draft helps in this current climate? I mean, obviously putting guys in the pros helps, but does it make a noticeable difference in the message they're able to relay to recruits?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's another thing that you can sell. And to be honest, if you look at Dave Aranda's track record and even Jeff Grimes' track record, I mean, they've put a lot of guys in the NFL. So I think they have a lot to sell, but doing it at Baylor and showing a class that's this deep and, the best class in Texas, the best in the Big 12 that they just put into the draft, I think that says something. And I think recruits notice that, and especially on the offensive side, because I think defensively everyone kind of knows what Aranda's about, the guys that he's gotten into the NFL. I mean, it speaks for itself. But offensively, you want to show that you're getting guys to the league consistently on that end. And, when you get guys like Treston Ebner and Tyquan Thornton, of course, a highly, guy that got drafted really high, and then Abram Smith signing a nice deal with the Saints, those are big things, right? And so I think going forward, it's important that Baylor continues that, because offensive recruits want to see offensive guys go to the NFL, and this is one step in that right direction. I think next year is going to be another great step in the direction, especially on the offensive line, which is something that I think Baylor needs to get back to, putting offensive linemen in the NFL. That really has not been something they've been, great at over the last, I guess, decade almost.
Yeah. So next year, just big guys on either side. When you got on the defense, Apu-Ika and Jackson Player will certainly, get some looks in the NFL, and Apu probably pretty high up there. I'm not sure about Jackson, but he's a guy who's got NFL ability, even though he lacks ideal size. And then, Connor Galvin and Jacob Gall, all those guys, right, should be maybe four offensive linemen in the draft next year.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, I mean, you were just talking about the guys that are probably going to get drafted, but, I think there's probably two guys that, you didn't even mention that I think have a chance to be two of the higher draft picks, and that's Khalil Keith and Gabe Hall, two guys that have just high upside. You just need to put the tape on. And, I mean, Khalil Keith has just been – he was a man among boys last year at times. It's just consistency, right? Consistency with him. And then Gabe Hall, he just needs the season to all come together where he's healthy the whole year. Because the flashes we see from him have been terrific. So those are two more guys to add to that list. And honestly, Paul, Craig and I talked about that this week on the Bearcast, and I was kind of going through and looking at some of the guys they might have in the draft next year. It could be a really, really deep class, especially if some guys decide to leave early after successful years. So I think Baylor's trending in the right direction when it comes to getting guys to the NFL.
Grayson, anything to make note of as far as the transfer portal? I know that it's kind of gotten whittled down now at this point. There was the post-spring rush, and there is the deadline, obviously, came into play as well. But anybody that's kind of kicking around there that you think the Bears are eyeing, or is that just kind of, not really much action going on there?
Yeah, there was actually one guy who entered the portal earlier this week, and I actually wrote a little bit of an article about him. His name's Matt Landers out of Toledo, and he's a big-time wide receiver prospect, 6'5", 200 pounds, and he's a guy who I think would fit everything that Baylor would need at wide receiver. Now, there's going to be a lot of teams after him. I mean, a whole lot. So we'll see what happens. NIL might come into play as well. But when you look at him and kind of see his track record and what he did, he's not as proven as maybe you would like, but he was a highly rated, near four-star guy that went to Georgia, played a little bit his freshman year, actually scored a touchdown against Baylor in the Sugar Bowl his first year there. And then the next year he got hurt, ended up transferring to Toledo. And last year, everything really came together for him down the stretch. It's super interesting. He ended up with 514 yards and 5 touchdowns on just 20 catches. Well, the crazy part about that is in the final 5 games for Toledo, he had 18 receptions for 486 yards and 5 touchdowns in just 5 games. So he really came on late in the season, averaged over 25 yards per catch. And is a guy that I think is just scratching the surface of what he's going to become. So we'll see what happens there. I think that there's interest from Baylor, but I also think that there's going to be a lot of other schools fighting for him. That it just seems like everyone needs a wide receiver this year and is really willing to pay for it. At least that's the sense that I'm getting. So we'll see what happens, but he is an interesting name that entered the portal this week that I'm monitoring.
Yeah, you know why everybody needs a wide receiver? Look at the NFL draft. That's why everybody needs a wide receiver. That's why everybody wants a wide receiver. Final thing for you, Grayson. Men's tennis starting their national championship pursuit. Are you going to be down in Waco to watch them take on ACU?
No, I won't be, and I'm bummed about it because they got that ACU matchup, and then they're probably going to face Texas A&M in the second game. So I'm excited for them. I think they're going to go on a run, and I know that we're all kind of sitting there going, okay, is this the year? Is this the year they could win a national championship? Got so close a year ago. I'm just excited for those guys. There's a lot of guys that have been on that team for it seems like forever. When you're talking about Adrian Boyden and Sven Law and Matthias Soto, you're just like, man, how great would it be for these guys who it literally feels like they've been there for like 5 years now. How great would it be for it all to come together and they win a championship this year? I'm going to be paying attention. I won't be there, but I'm really excited for them and just happy with the job that Michael Woodson has done, just continuing the trajectory of this program. I mean, it's really, really fascinating to watch, and it's one of the best tennis programs in the entire country. Grayson
Grundhoefer, Sic'Em365.com. Grayson, have a great weekend, buddy. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
There's Grayson Grundhoefer, and if you are a member of our site in the premium section, Grayson